So, hello everyone. As you've seen, my name is Harrison Mwangi, and um, I've done several things in tech. Although I'm an economics student, I've participated in the Developer Students Club Solution Challenge, and that's why I started out with learning Django, and my journey so far has been great. And the main aim of this session is to share the knowledge that I've gained along the way, especially with relation to test-driven development, to help other people to get started with Django. And I'll be using the acronym TDD to mean test-driven development, which is a software development process that relies on the repetition of a very short development cycle. Requirements are turned into very specific test cases, and the code is improved so that the tests pass. So basically, that's the definition I got from Wikipedia, and I think we are going to see what that really means, because the English there is kind of too much. And on the right, we can see basically the whole idea of TDD, where you start with it's method called the red green refactor method, which you start with you're writing a test that definitely is supposed to fail, and then you write code that implements the functionality of the test, and then you refactor to eliminate redundancy and improve basically the code quality. So we can move on to the next slide so that I can explain in detail the first step of the red-green refactor method. I can see some people have joined. Thank you. So the first step is writing a test or adding a test that defines a function or improvement of a function that exists, a functionality that exists. And the test should be very concise, should be very clear, like on to the point. And for you to write the test, you must clearly understand the feature specification and requirements. So basically, it means that you should have sat down and really thought about the whole feature or functionality that you want to implement, and you like kind of put it down in code. You are kind of writing the functionality. You want to kind of sketch the functionality in the code. So on to the next step, which is where you implement, you run all the tests and see if the new test fails. And the main purpose of this is to validate that the existing tests are working correctly, and the new tests should fail since the new functionality has not yet been implemented. So basically, we are going to see that in action. We can move on to the next slide, because I'm sure these are really jam-packed session. I do really want to get into the action. So in the third step, it's where you kind of write the code that is just sufficient to make the test pass. So here you don't just write everything that you think should be there. So you write the code that is enough to make the test pass. So you don't care about the code quality here. So and another important point of caution is that you must not write code that is beyond the functionality that the test checks. So on to the fourth step of the red-green refactor method. Now, if you have implemented the functionality, and in step one we had written the tests. Now all the test cases should pass, and you can be confident that the new code meets the test requirements and does not break or degrade any existing features. So, but if in this point along the way you might find that some tests actually break, and if they break, the new code must actually, let me mention something. Okay, at this point in time, you might find that some tests might break, and you might need to improve the tests along the way, and the new code should not should be adjusted to meet the new tests that have been recently added. I know I'm kind of mixing you up along at this point, but it's good. I think in a different session from today, we are going to see how to handle regressions, because that's what the whole idea of what I was kind of trying to mention at this point. So, and in the last step, after writing the tests, after running the tests and seeing they pass, writing the code, confirming that the tests now pass with the new code. Now this is the time where you refactor, which is basically you improve the code quality without changing or altering the existing functionality, which could involve removing duplication. You might find in some point you have written similar code, similar methods, similar classes. So this is the time to sit down and improve on that, and make sure like you follow the DRY principle, which is an acronym for don't repeat yourself. You should. It's also at this point that you can move new code to where it was convenient for passing the test, where it more logically belongs. Basically, it's also part of refactoring. Like you might find some. Maybe you have written a class, and it's better fits in a different module. So this is the time to move it to that different module. And also you can rename the objects, classes, modules, variables, and method names to represent their current functionality, their current purpose, and use as extra functionality is added. So at a glance, that's the 5 steps of the red-green refactor method. Charlene, you can kind of move back to the slides so that people can see the pick on the red-green refactor method, so that those who have recently joined can have a glimpse of what we've just talked about, just before we discuss the benefits and now move on to the code. Yes, so just before that, yes. So basically, the people who have joined, thank you for joining. And this is what we have been going through the last few minutes. And we have talked about the 5 steps, although here you are seeing the 3 major ones. So it's basically writing the tests, running all the tests. Maybe those 2 steps are mostly about running the test. So you can think of it as the link from red to green. Write the test, run the test, and prove they are failing. You write the code to make, you write the code to implement the functionality, and you write the least amount of code to make the tests pass. And then you run the tests again, and this time the test should pass. And that's why we are moving from red, where the tests were calling out for something amiss, and now the tests are passing. That's why it's green. And now from there, after everything is okay, now you can sit down and refactor, improve the tests, the code quality, basically. Yes. So from now we can move on to the benefits of TDD. I know you're going to skip some few slides. And so, the benefits of TDD, I'm going to kind of explain as briefly as possible, so that now we can sit down and do the actual work and see how everything works. Since this is just a methodology, you can only learn it by practicing. So the first, maybe not really the first, it's in any order. So one of the benefits of the TDD is that it helps you to build exactly what is required. And that is very important, because in a past session, those who have been following along, there was a speaker called Alan who mentioned about focusing on what the client wants. This is especially when building stuff for external clients, of which the client might be you. So it keeps you in focus. So then another one is test-driven development results in a better program design and higher code quality. And that's all kind of, it boils down from the previous step. If you have taken the time to sit down and think about what you are building, you will be better. You build a better system basically, and the code quality will be better, since if from the fifth step of the TDD, which was refactoring, you have sat down and seen where you can optimize your code. Yes, and another benefit is that tests serve as living documentation. So in this point, I'm thinking of maybe you are the one who was writing up the code, or someone else wrote the code, and maybe you don't quite understand how some feature works, or maybe some method, some class, some basically anything within the code, you don't understand how it works. So if the tests are available, you can just sit down and run the code, the tests for that particular method, or that particular a class that you want to learn about how it functions. And if you just check about the asserts, you can be able to kind of get an idea of how that object, let me call it an object, that object works, whether it's a method, a class, a function, a variable name. Yes. So the tests there serve as living documentation, and we are going to see that. And test-driven development reduces the time required for project development. And it sounds counterintuitive, but that's really the case, because once you have from this benefit of building what exactly is required, you are going to save time, because you're not going to focus on some kind of, let me call them, unnecessary features, because anyway, if they are not important enough to be put in tests, they are not important now. And it also helps you to keep, like, you'll stay focused, and also that improves productivity and kind of reduces the time for development. And another benefit is that test-driven development saves on project costs in the long run. And I wish I could share on the screen there, but maybe it will be updated in the slides after the session. There was some graph depicting how project costs run over time for TDD versus non-TDD projects. And I saw that the maintenance costs are usually very high for non-TDD projects. And this is because mainly probably that some bugs it's not easy to catch some bugs, maybe, or some developer wrote the code and someone else is the one who is coming to maintain it. So they don't quite understand how everything works based on the other point of as a test serving as a living documentation. But basically, it's actually proven that TDD saves on project costs, and there are fewer bugs, definitely, because you sit down and kind of think of all the corner cases, and that's what you kind of put down in tests and see that the tests pass. And finally, with TDD, you will get a reliable solution. Like you can be confident that your solution works. Like it reduces the struggle between development and production, whereby you can have that confidence to deploy and be sure that you'll not be called and told that something broke, something is amiss, because you sat down and wrote the test and kind of you're sure. Even if you are told something broke, you won't start looking over everything. You'll kind of sit down and check the tests or look down at the code. You can kind of pick what is wrong in a very short time. So you can get a really reliable solution. And without much ado, I would like to share something here. That code without tests is a prototype at best. And on the right, this is something that I picked up from the net. You can see basically it's quite humorous about the top-notch companies developing very simple and user-friendly products, but someone else's company, this will not be you, probably after this session, this will not be you, where you kind of put everything that you think will be important and you don't care about user experience. So I think you can share your questions along the way in the chat. And I think I can move on to the actual. We'll be working on a simple library catalog application, which will help us kind of have the gist on TDD. And let me, as the requirements indicated, you need to have Python, you need to have Git, you need to have Git, you need to have Python, you need to have Gecko driver, and you need to have Firefox browser. It seems I'm using Chrome, but the test will be running on Firefox. And without much ado, let me go to the GitHub repo. So that we can save on time, I'll share some code snippets in a different repository so that we can all follow along. And yes. So the code examples, the code snippets are going to be found in this repository. I can share the link here. And then the main code itself, we are going to put it in this repository so that maybe in a different session we can be able to move on from where we will leave at today. Possibly we'll do a lot. Yes, and I can see it's almost 20 minutes. It's 22 minutes past. So I'll just gloss over the requirements again and show so that anyone who hasn't yet installed can install. Basically, what I had a problem with installing was this Gecko driver. And for the Windows guys, just install the zip file, depending on whether you are on your OS, whether it's 64-bit or 32-bit. And after you install it, make sure you add it to path. The simplest method is opening where your Python version, the Python version that you've installed, of which mine I had pinned it. It's usually in your user/app data, of which this kind of, it's usually hidden, so you'll have to check it. App data, local programs, Python, and then whichever Python version you have. And then once you have unzip the file, the download from this repository, the Mozilla repository, you just the easiest way is just come and add the executable here, like just what I've done, so that you will not get the error that Gecko driver needs to be installed in path or something like the sort. For the Linux guys, I think you're going to just unzip using whatsoever method you know to unzip, and then you add it to / and I think it's / user/local/bin or /user/bin. Yes, so let's get started. So and if I get too fast, you can kind of comment in the chat, and I'll kind of slow down in case I go too fast. So we'll basically be working with two repositories. There is this demo. Sorry. So there is this demos repository that I had showed you. This one contains the code, and the code is in this opaque directory. Opaque basically stands for Online Public Access Catalog. It's kind of the system where the user interface of most library systems. And we are going to open the repository that contains no content other than the README and the license and the git ignore. So anyone who is familiar with Django, you'll find it quite easy to follow along. So to start with, I'm going to open up my terminal and create a virtual environment, basically. And the first command I'll type in is Python module virtual environment. I use venv, and if you don't have it installed, it's in the README of this repository, TDD Django. So I have the virtual environment, and it takes quite some time to set up. Let me be opening this other repository containing the code snippets. And it's basically the whole project. So I'll take you step by step. So the next, I see the virtual environment is ready. So let me activate it. And the next step is to install Django. So pip install Django. It might take some time. I'll be using Django 3.1. Those who are familiar with the changes between the previous versions, I hope you'll be able to follow along. And it's using the cached version, so I think it will be quite fast. And let's wait. Basically, let me just go over this repository. So we'll first create the project, which is this opaque, and make it like the root of the repository once Django is installed. And seems to take quite some time. Not sure why it's that slow. Wow, okay. Just installed. I don't like that error, so I'm going to just upgrade pip right away. So Python module pip install upgrade pip. Be careful if you don't specify the Python, pip is going to uninstall and then probably will the terminal will just be left hanging and pip is installed. So the next step is to start the Django project. So Django admin start project, and let me call it what? Opaque. So created the project, and you can see on the right there are two directories. For opaque, there is the project one, which is the one that is currently highlighted, and the app, which contains settings, URLs, and other files. Yes. So at this point in time, since it's a TDD Django talk or kind of practical session, let's check if the project is working properly. So let me just cd into opaque and run the tests. You can run the tests with Python manage.py tests, and it should run the tests, and there is no tests actually. So that proves that the project setup is okay. And without much ado, I'm going to do two things. I will kind of like the project. I want this TDD with Django to be the project directory. So I'm just going to move the manage.py here and move it. And then I think I'm going to merge this directory with this one. Yes. I think it will take me quite some time. Okay, I'll have to do it the manual way. Let me just come here. And move this one to the project directory. It's done. Now let me run the tests again so that we can see if the project is still okay. Sorry. Oh, I removed the project. I changed the project directory, sorry. And now I should run the tests. they should also pass, even despite moving things around. So that's one, it's done. And usually to this, beside TDD, I usually like kind of want to separate my configurations from code. So I'll also do that right here, right away. Remove the secret key. Of course, I can change it. I'll not put this one in production. So I can remove the secret key and debug. And yes, and debug. So and allowed host. So basically, I want to use a module called Python decouple to do the separation of configurations from code. So I'll just do pip install python dash decouple, still within the virtual environment, of course, and it's okay. So the other thing I'll do is import from decouple. From decouple, I'll import two things, config and a function called CSV, which I'll use it to cast these allowed hosts. So the first thing, I'll create an environment file, and that was the main importance of having the gitignore, so that no, I don't want to create it here. So there are basically two ways you can create a .env here, or create a settings here, settings.ini here. So the first thing I'll do is copy the secret key and get the configuration from the .env. So config secret key, and then come here and paste the secret key and remove these quotes, definitely. And then the next thing I'll do is config, add the debug configuration. And I'm going to provide a default value, which is false, so that even if I forget to put debug, it will definitely be false. And default equals false. And cast, I'll have to cast it to a Python data type, which is Boolean. And that's done. And then allowed hosts, I'll also have to config, separate the configurations from code also for allowed hosts. This is good to do at the start of the project, so that you don't forget along the way. Allowed hosts and cast equals that function we imported there, CSV, and then you have to call it using the brackets. So I think that's done. I'm going to run the tests again and see if everything works. Okay, sorry, I have to add the allowed hosts, and I have to add two variables, local hosts and 127.0.0.1. I think that's done. That's okay. So I think we can run the tests again and see if everything works right. Again, we did everything right. Everything is working. So the next step in this case would be, let me just add debug equal to true here, so that in case, I just like to have it like that. So the next step would be to create the tests file within OPAC, the app. So I'm going to straight away create a tests.py file, and right away I'm going to move to the demos, and in this tests.py I've not committed the last. Okay, I did commit. So let me take what I have not committed yet. I'm going to add the first initial functional test scaffolding. That's what I added first, so that we can do as we had seen. You write some tests, you run them, and they fail. You add the code, and then they run the tests again, and they should pass. And then from there, we can move on to refactoring, and basically we repeat the 3 cycles. Sorry. So I'm just going to copy paste, and right away copy paste. I'll take you through what everything does in this file, so that you kind of have an understanding of what is really happening now that we have gotten the intuition behind TDD. And the first thing we are importing is the live server test case. This we want to do in browser testing, and that's why I requested you to install Gecko driver, which is really going to be opening the Firefox browser and doing those automated tests. So, and I'm going to import the Selenium WebDriver. So the first thing, I'm going to create a browser. I can call it object, which is a Firefox browser object. And then the implicitly wait is going to kind of wait some period before showing up the results for the in the browser. And this basically is in the setup method. The setup method kind of puts all things that we need to have before the tests, and the tear down method within any tests, anything that inherits from test case. I'm sorry I didn't take you through that, but basically we can do some quick Googling, but I can see time is only just take my word to be true, so that you can save time. So test case, anything that inherits from test case inherits from the Python unit test module, and basically the setup method sets up the data, and tear down removes the data, or removes the objects that were set up for every test method. That's the most important thing to mention, for every test method. So if we have another method, maybe tests, admin, find, update, books, so we'll have the setup before that method, before this method, and before the other method. So, and the test student find books, basically this is what in line with what we had discussed earlier about the tests following the user story. Kind of, you kind of put the user story or the functional requirements as code. So maybe I used as a very simple user story. I want to test that a student can find books. So in this case, Harrison is a student who would like to find some programming books to read so he can improve his software development skills. He visits the homepage of OPAC, and basically the from the Firefox object, we are going to have we are going to have a browser, which is here, and we are going to have a live server URL. That's let's move on to the next step of the user story. He knows he's in the right place because he can see the name of the site in the heading. And I'm sure this is kind of maybe strange to you at this point in time if you're not used to TDD. And here we are kind of simulating a user. We are finding elements by CSS selector, and let me run this test, and it shows you it should fail, but at least we'll see what we want as we move along. So without much ado, I'm going to run the python manage.py tests again, and this time it should fail, and there should be one test. Oops, another error. I expected a test to fail. Instead, I got an error. So this is a subtle gotcha. So we have to import Selenium, or to install Selenium. So pip install Selenium. And now we can run the tests again. Python manage.py tests. I'm sure this time it should run, and there should be no issues, and there should be a failure instead of an error. An error. Okay, we got an error. Sorry. And at least it gives us some very important message. We are unable to, the Selenium wasn't able to find the navbar brand. I used navbar brand because maybe I forgot to mention that I'm assuming that we are going to use Bootstrap to build out the front end. And as you know, the site title will be in the navbar brand. In the navbar brand class. Okay, in the navbar, sorry. And now that the test fails actually. So this is really getting interesting. So the next step would be to implement that functionality. And implementing that functionality means we have to create the homepage of the website of OPAC in this case. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me keep myself in tandem with what I have here so that we are able to follow along. Let me go to history, and after creating, yes, I have to add the Solos app, and not Solos app. I have to. So I have to create the application. Sorry, the app for books. So since in what I'm familiar with, and what most people do with regard to setting up apps in Django, the app name should be the project name in the model, the name of the model, of the main model in that app. And so just before I forget, since the tests are failing, we can do a commit now. I hope you have Git installed. And let me come back to here and do this. Just going to copy paste and git add all files. And let me double check to see that it didn't add anything I didn't want it to add, especially those configurations that is separated from the code. I can see everything that is in the project is there, and then git commit. The message is that let me yes. So we created the project and set it up and wrote our first functional test, and kind of you can follow through the user story. Basically, after this, we are going to see the person can sees the inputs of the search form, including labels and placeholders. He types in a subject and he sees too many search results, and so he adds a particular author and clicks on a search result. And now we hear it kind of implies a book list page, a book detail page, of which probably we are not going to reach there. So I'll leave that out as an assignment just in case we don't even get there. So the next step would be to create the books app and have the homepage of our website. So I'm going to do Python manage.py start app, and this app is going to be known as books. Just as we said, it's going to be called books since books is the main model of this application. And here we have the books application, and I'm going to kind of, although we say that we should have very small changes so that I can see it's almost 10 minutes to 6. I'm kind of going to rush about, and we can see what we can do in the books app, and at least by 6 we should have the homepage of our site up and running, and from there we can anyone interested in following along can follow along through the other repository, this one, the demos. So in this application we are going to still go with TDD. And the first thing that I'm going to do, just as after installing any application, I'm going to install it in settings in the install apps. This is not part of TDD, and kind of want the Django apps to be separate from my apps. And so I'm just going to add books here. The next thing would be, since I'm sure we are going to write so many tests in this application, I'm going to create a module for tests. So tests, and then in the test directory, I'm going to have, since it's a Python module, it should have the init data init.py. So basically, this is how your app structure should be: books, and these ones were already there: the views, tests, models, apps, admin, and migrations folder. And now we added tests and a file in tests, the tests folder or directory called data init.py. So I'm going to kind of move these tests here and first rename it. I'm going to rename it tests URLs, since URLs are the first thing we are going to set up. URLs, test URLs.py. And here we can close this data init and set tests should be here. Settings is already done. You've already finished with it. And the first thing, we're going to create the URL routing of our homepage. But since we don't want to create a URL, another URL file within books, we are going to add the URL configuration in the project urls.py, but we are still going to test it within the apps URLs, test URLs module. So the first thing I'm going to do is rush over to the demos repository and open books, the application, and jump over to testurls.py and grab this code block and come over here and paste it there. And these should be all the tests that we need to set up for the homepage of the website. We want to use a function-based view called index. So we are asserting that the function used to render the homepage of the website is really index. So that's what this assert equal is doing. And let me go back to go to urls. Just before, since we are using TDD, we're going to run the tests. And this time there should be two, a failure probably and an error. Python manage.py tests and Firefox opens up. There is going to be an error. And there is also another error. So it's red. Now there's really the red part of the red-green refactor method. Everything looks amiss. I'm seeing some constructive feedback that it cannot import the index from books.views. So that means basically that the function does not exist. So I'm going to head over right into views.py and I'm going to do something quite silly, but it's going to help you really understand TDD because I'm seeing time is running out and I have to show you. I wanted to show you using another example, but I have to use this one and pass. So index really exists, but now it doesn't do anything. So let's see. Python manage.py tests. And this time we are going to get an error. Two errors actually. Yes. So next, so there is constructive feedback. Django URLs exception. So it tried admin and it tried the path, which is empty, but it didn't find the view. Basically, that's what the feedback from the test is telling us. The homepage probably exists, but there is no view to render that homepage. So the next thing I'm going to do is head over right to the demos and go to the project, which is opaque views.py. I know it seems a bit strange that I have to copy paste code everywhere. So I'm going to grab the URL routing and I'm going to import that. So next, I'm going to just come in the project URLs within the TDD with Django repository. And I usually kind of like to keep my imports separate from the Django imports. And next, I'm going to add the URL routing. Keep in I want to highlight something very important. The URL patterns are tried in order from first to last, so it's important that you put your URLs in a way that even if order it's going to be efficient when that order is when the server is going to be running the checks from one URL pattern to another. So basically, we can see that the URL routing for this view, even though the view doesn't do anything, even though the view doesn't do anything, even though the view doesn't do anything, we need to show it still tells us that the test passed, and that's the first dot here. So that means the URL configuration is okay. Next, we are going to probably do the view, work on the view, and then we are going to call it a day. And now I'm going to do the test, go to the test views directory, and I'm going to copy this test for the views. To test that the view is already okay. And going in this test directory, I'm going to create a test underscore views .py and add that code block, and basically that will be it for the tests. Basically, I'm using request factory instead of the Django test client here to be able to separate. Instead of the Django test client, which is accessed via self.client, it usually kinds of puts together the URL and the views together. So I kind of want to separate that functionality in the test so that the tests for views run independently of the URLs kind of. And that's what I'm going to do here and run. These tests should fail as well. And you can see time is up, but I'm going to get 2 errors. And a server error, basically because the view here doesn't do anything. It's just function. And let's go through the feedback. And you can see index takes 0 position arguments, but 1 was given. Basically, request argument. So just to have a kind of quicken things up, I'm going to go to the views.py and come back to here and grab this snippet, and I'm going to go to the views.py file and replace this with this. And now run the tests again. There should be an error because the template does not exist. And then we can add the template, and you are going to see that the view is going to yes. So basically, template does not exist, books/index.html. So let's do a quick hack. We just need to implement what just needs to be done. So I'm going to just head over to the books, and as is the convention in Django, we are going to create a directory called templates, and within it, I'm going to create a directory called books. And inside it, That's where I'm going to add my index.html file. So that should be your hierarchy, kind of your folder structure. Books, templates, books, index.html. And this time, the two tests should pass. And you can see they passed. And I think that's we can do something very small and make sure the first functional test passes. And that's really something. Let me just head over and I'll show you what it needs to be implemented in index.html. We'll go through the file, and now I'm going to just add this. Yes. So I'm going to add the link with a class of a brand with a title of opaque. And that's what will make the functional test to pass, and that we can call it a day. Yes. Again, I run the test using python manage.pytest. And this time you're going to not see a server error, you're going to see a very quick flash and the test passes. Yes, and at this point you can commit something like you can add a commit that you created the books application and created the functional tests. No, the tests, you added the URL routing and added the index view. Let's do that right now, and we can end the practical session. So I'll just do git add dot to add everything within the tests, within the everything which is unstaged basically. And then I'm going to do a commit, git commit dash m, and I'll say created books app and books app, sorry, added URL conf for homepage page, and added the index view and template. Sorry. And that's it for today, and we can close off with that. And just to make sure that everything works, whatever you have built works, I'm going to run python manage.pytest again, and the test should pass. At least our first scaffolding of the functional test passes.